Okay, we are getting back on the lathe build. And since the last video, we did the tailstock spindle right here and the screw. So what I really want to do is finish up these last pieces here. So I want to get the hand wheel and that nut piece, I'm not sure what it's called, the handle and the washer, and the screws is part of the kit. So I want to finish that up so I can actually get a hand wheel on this thing. Like I said, I'm going to machine all of that later, and I'll do those other things later, but I want to finish that. So I think we'll start with item number 7, the hand wheel casting. So what I did when I put my little book together is I put the carriage hand wheel and the tailstock hand wheel on the same page, and it's pretty much the same operations for both. I need a 3/32 drill, and then file square, and then a 1/16 drill through here. And again, that's the same steps on this one, but those two hand wheels are slightly different sizes. I'm just going to do one at a time. I'm just going to do this one now. I guess it'd be smart to do both, but I'm just going to focus on this one. And here's what that casting looks like. And so what I need to do is go over it with some files, get rid of any flashing, which actually doesn't look too bad. A little bit right there, so I'll file that off round. And, a lot of these, when you look at the real thing, the hand wheel part is kind of nice and polished. And I'm just looking at my lathe now. And actually, on my lathe, the tailstock is all painted, but the carriage hand wheel, that end is kind of polished. In other words, if we just kind of look up this way, right there, you can see my tailstock, that hand wheel is painted, whereas this one around there is not painted, but inside is. And that's something I've been thinking about with this model, is if I want to paint it to kind of match the real thing, or if I just want to leave it raw aluminum. I'm kind of going back and forth with that. Part of me wants to paint it like it'd be real. Part of me wants to just leave it raw metal. So I'm not really sure how I want to do that yet. But until I figure that out, what I'm going to do is just kind of polish that outer end and just leave the inside of there as cast. So, but like I said, first thing I want to do is kind of clean it up a little bit and then drill those holes. So let me do that off camera, and I'll get back to you once I have this set up in the mill to put those 2 holes in. So that might not be the best way to hold it, but it's what I came up with now. I'm going to have to do something different for the center hole, I think. But I'm going to go ahead and just spot that point. The drill that goes in there is really skinny, so I'm just going to touch it just so when the real drill hits, it doesn't wander any. So, and I know there could be some flex, so I'm just going to go real slow, and I'm going to be watching for any flex. But like I said, that's just going to start it. So let's get that going. All right, so here's that hand wheel. It's not going to win any awards for square holeness, but it's good. It works. The dimensions, it says file to 0.1 square, and I noticed that my square files are pretty much almost exactly 0.1, pretty close to it. So basically, I just went in with the square file, and I knew as long as the file didn't go all the way through, then it wouldn't be too big. But I just I'd go a little bit and then test fit, and I just kept doing that until it fit pretty much perfect. One thing I did not want was for that to be too loose, but I also didn't want to have to force it on, and that is pretty much a perfect fit. There's just the tiniest bit of wiggle, but really nothing bad at all. So yeah, I'm very happy with that. I suppose I could have made a brooch or something, but it really did not take long with the file. A few minutes with the file, and we got that square hole. So happy with that. And the next part is this. This is the tailstock spindle cap. That will be machined out of the 5/16 cold rolled steel. I'm going to do that here in just a moment. But what I did off camera, I went ahead and did these washers. I need 3 of them. This was machined from 1/4-inch brass. And so that was the stock for it. And you can see I turned down the outer diameter, drilled the hole, and then parted them off. And that gave me the 3 washers. And I did not record that. It's just very basic, simple turning and parting on the lathe there. And in fact, the hardest part was finding one that I dropped. I actually spent more time looking for it than it would have taken me to just make a new one. But I found it. The next thing I did, the handle here. Now it says you need 3, and this is machined from 1/8-inch diameter brass. That is this material here. And, I suppose it would have made sense to just do all 3 at the same time, but it's not like the washers where you turn one diameter, drill through, and just part them off. With this one, once you make one and part it off, well, you're basically starting over. So I only made the one. Here's what it's looking like. And you'll notice that it just says shape to suit. So I started parting off at the right length, and then I just went at it with some files and some sandpaper until I got a shape that I liked. So the length is correct. That outermost diameter is correct. And so again, just put a shape in it with some files and sandpaper and a little bit of a light polish. And that was it. And this goes in here. Goes in here like that. Nice tight fit. So that's the handle, the hand wheel. So what I need to do is just peen over the end of that. And a few little taps of a hammer, that'll peen that over, and then that'll be stuck in for good. I suppose you could Loctite it or JB weld it or whatever, but like I said, I'll just peen that end. It's only sticking out a tiny bit. Peen that in a little bit, that'll lock that in. And of course that washer, let me go grab the screw. Calls for this screw. Put the washer on. And there's that assembly. No, that's not all the way tight. I don't really need it all the way tight because it's got to come back off again. And, I might just cut that screw down because it's getting tight. I don't want to risk damaging the threads. It got tight before the screw is fully down. But you get the idea. That's how that's going to go. I'm going to cut that screw shorter. I was a little bit nervous tapping those threads because a couple of times I could feel the tap like starting to twist a little bit, and the last thing I wanted to do is break that tap because it's my only tap that size, and plus I'd have to remake the part if that happened. So I was a little bit nervous about breaking the tap, so I didn't push it. So I'm going to have to cut that screw down maybe, I don't know, 4 or 5 threads should be plenty, and there's still plenty of threads to hold it in there. But that's pretty much that part done. Like I said, I can't put it on for good anyways because the other piece has to go on here. I did get in the mail my taper reamer. This is the 4/0 taper reamer. And so now I can finally go back to this piece, the spindle, and I can ream that end until the taper pin fits in there. And I need to put a handle on here. I'll probably just do that by hand so that I don't overdo it. We'll see if that did anything. Yeah, that lets it go in a little bit further. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to continue to do that. It does go in further than it did. Like I said, I'll put a little tap handle or something on there. And just keep going until it has a good fit. For now, though, what I want to do is start on this. And that piece basically goes here and holds this into the tailstock. And I've been thinking how I want to go about doing this. I think what I'm going to do is hold it from that end and start machining on this end, so I can cut the threads, cut the diameters, then the threads, and then take it to the mill and cut the flats and then part it off. So that's the plan. Let me get it set up in the lathe, and then I'll take over to the lathe and see what it looks like. Okay, so a funny thing happened on the way to the lathe. I quickly realized that I don't have a collet for 5/16. And I'm thinking, well, that's no big deal. I'll just use the 4-jaw chuck. But I have to put it in a mill to turn down the hex. And I have a 6-sided collet block, and I wouldn't be able to put the 4-jaw chuck in that. So what I do have is a 1/2-inch collet and some 1/2-inch brass. So I cut a piece, drilled it to 5/16, took it to my crooked bandsaw, and did what that bandsaw does best and cut some crooked slots. I cut 4 that way and 4 that way. Probably didn't need to do from both directions. Probably would have been fine just having 4 on one side. But I think that'll help it squeeze more evenly. But now that can go in here. And of course, I can put my stock in there. And then, so now I should be able to chuck that up in my collet and hold it and do all the machining on the lathe and the mill. So now that I have my adapter, and I need to make a reminder to go ahead and probably order a 5/16 collet, just so I don't have to use that every time, which, if it works, it works. But anyways, let me get over to the lathe, and then we'll set up and start turning this down. Okay, so first step is to just clean up the end, and we need to drill a hole through. The little brass coupler seems to be holding perfectly fine, so let's just square up the end. A little bit of run out. Not terrible, I guess. I think I'm going to loosen that up and give it a spin, see if I can get some of that run out of there. That might be my little homemade coupler there. I think that's better. Yeah, that looks better. Here. So we'll just reface this. going to 0 the Y on the DRO, and we'll get a center point in it. And drill through with a 1/8. I just put a mark on the drill bit so I'd know if I got to the mark, then I just drilled a little bit longer than the length of the part. So that should be good enough right there. I just want to see how good that is. Oh, that's perfect. I was afraid it would be a little too loose or too tight if I didn't get the diameter of that turned correctly, but that is just about right. I'm going to go ahead and turn this down for the threads, and so I need to come back. So I need to go that way, 4.8, and then I need to turn, actually 4.75, but I'll go to 4.8, and turn a diameter of 4.8. All right, there's supposed to be a little undercut at the base of the threads, and I've got that tool, which is almost the perfect width. It's just a tiny bit thicker than it should be, but I think it'll work fine. And it just needs to go down to a diameter of 0.16, which is just a little bit more. I think it's just to give a relief to the base of the threads, maybe. All right, now we're going to come over here, turn that down to diameter. Okay, so here's that part off of the mill, and I do want to say, they gave all of the dimensions that you need, but they didn't really give all the dimensions that you want. Um, in other words, when I went to move the cutter on the lathe to go from here to here, they don't give you that dimension. They give you that dimension and that dimension, so it's easy math to figure out, but still, typically, for something like that, then I just resketched it, and I sketched it in the way I was machining. So I'm holding it from that end and machining from that end, and so I just put in the diameters, the dimensions, for what I need for the DRO on the lathe. Also, the hex, 3/16 hex. What I did then was I just drew another sketch for the diameter, and I then went into a Google hex calculator. If you just, you just go online and just Google hex calculator, there's several to choose from. I just picked the first one. I put in the overall diameter, the main diameter, and then it gave me the small radius from there to the flat. So you just subtract that from the radius, which is, of course, half the diameter, and that gives you how much to take off of each side, of each of the 6 sides. So that told me I had to take off 0.01235, which is 0.32 millimeters. So I just put it in my hex collet and just found the top and took off 0.32 millimeters from each one, and it turned out pretty nice. I'm not mad at that at all. And so I then just put it back into the lathe, parted it off to length, and that's the part. So I'm very happy with that. And so if we start putting these together, this then goes over top like so. That'll thread into the tailstock. And then here's the hand wheel with the little handle. I peened the end over. So that actually can still turn, but it won't come out. And of course that goes over that hex, not the hex, but the square, like that. Then you can put the screw with the washer. And I did cut the screw down a little bit. I cut about 5 threads off. I could have tapped it a little bit deeper, but I did not want to risk breaking the tap. So shortening the screw was a better choice, I think. A safer option anyways. So now I can get the screw nice and tight. And there's the hand wheel. There's just a tiny bit of movement here, which, I mean, you don't want it pinching because then you wouldn't be able to turn the handle. I don't think that's too much to worry about. I think that's fine. I mean, I could, I guess, put a little shim in there, but I don't know. That's kind of pointless, I think. So there's that assembly. And of course, that screws in to the spindle. And I also turned the 60 degree for the dead center, so that can go right in there. You can push that down, and that's locked in now. That's wedged in. And so now, when you back this to the last couple of threads, it'll push that dead center out, just like on a real machine. So I am very happy with that. That is that assembly. So I'm actually really tempted to go ahead and start on the casting, the tailstock casting. But like I said in the previous video, I really need to get back on some other projects that are kind of more important in this one. I've been stalling and being distracted by this, but so I'm going to leave it as that. I'm tempted to maybe turn that screw head into a bolt head. I don't know, that doesn't bother me too much, I guess. Maybe a little bit. So that'll be a later thing. If it continues to bother me, maybe I'll turn that into a bolt head. But for now, I'm going to call that done. That is that assembly. And hopefully you guys got something out of this and enjoyed it. And until next time, thanks for watching.